You walk through a courtyard that smells of crushed mint and lamp oil. The marble is cool beneath your bare feet, though the sun has barely risen. Somewhere, a nightingale stirs in the fig tree. You're not meant to be here, not among the columns and fountains, but behind them, where beauty is currency and silence is survival. Before we begin, take a moment to join this growing circle of history lovers scattered across the world. From Rome to Rio, from Lahore to London, thousands of us sit beneath the same digital sky, each drawn by the echoes of the past. If this story moves you, leave a mark. A like, a comment telling us where you're watching from, and a reminder that history still breathes through us all. Now, let us step into the garden. In the Roman world, order was everything visible, measurable, and merciless. A villa was not simply a home, but a miniature empire. At its center lay the atrium, the heart of domestic power, and from it branched corridors that led to lives both elevated and forgotten. The master's footsteps echoed where slaves knelt, where servants watched the play of shadow through carved screens, and where young men too beautiful for freedom learned to move like whispers. Beauty, in Rome, was never innocent. It could crown a man or condemn him. Poets like Ovid praised it as a divine spark, yet in the marketplace, beauty became a price tag. A boy with clear skin and light eyes might fetch a higher sum than a skilled artisan. His body was a canvas upon which another man's status could be painted. The philosopher Seneca once wrote that Rome was diseased with luxury, but he said nothing of the luxuries that bled. They were found everywhere on the edges of conquest and in the noise of the slave market. Some were captured in Gaul or Thrace, others stolen from Greek households where soft features and musical voices were prized. They arrived in Rome bound and bewildered, their names replaced with shorter ones, easier to command. In the private quarters of a senator's villa, the training began. An overseer, often a eunuch, taught them how to walk, how to serve wine without trembling, how to meet a master's gaze only when invited. Linen garments were draped over them, perfumed with cedar and myrrh. Their hair was oiled and curled. They were taught songs in Latin they did not understand, and how to laugh softly when the noble guests made jokes. Sometimes their beauty became part of the architecture itself. One poet wrote of the boy who poured wine like a living statue. Another, found scrawled in Pompeii's wall, reads, "He stood by the fountain, silent, like Narcissus, except that this one could bleed." It is easy to imagine them in the peristyle gardens, long colonnades open to the sky, fountains murmuring, the air thick with rosemary and crushed citrus leaves. They waited there, polished like marble and just as voiceless. A guest might notice one and whisper to the host, "Where did you find such perfection?" The host would smile. "In the East," he might say, as if collecting souls were the same as collecting art. Rome's hierarchy did not stop at the city gates. It invaded the bedchamber. To dominate another's body was to affirm one's power. The law itself drew no moral line, only a social one. A freeborn Roman male could take pleasure where he wished, so long as he remained the penetrator, never the penetrated. Submission, even by force, was considered the mark of weakness. And so the concubine existed in a paradox. Desired for his softness, despised for it too. Occasionally one would rise. A master might grow fond, offer trinkets, or whisper promises of manumission, but affection could shift with the wind. A concubine's beauty was a wasting asset each year. Each scar, each frown could lower his worth. "Do not age," one master was recorded saying, half in jest, to the boy beside him at dinner. The boy smiled as he had been trained and poured more wine. There were rules even in tenderness. They were not to eat at the same table, not to speak in public, not to contradict. When a senator's concubine once dared to glance at another guest, the story goes that the master ordered his head shaved as punishment, a mark of shame that took months to grow out. "Let him learn," said the master, "that beauty belongs to the one who pays for it. Yet in the quiet hours before dawn, the house shifted. Servants slept, lamps guttered, and from the slave quarters came the soft sounds of breath, whispers in foreign tongues. Perhaps one spoke of home, a mother's bread, a brother lost to war. Another hummed a tune he once played on a lyre. These were forbidden sounds, fragile acts of remembrance in a world that demanded silence. One night, in a villa near Tibur, a name was carved into the underside of a marble bench. Eros vivit. Eros lives. Archaeologists would find it centuries later, the letters shallow but defiant. No records name who carved it. Perhaps it was a concubine, perhaps a friend. But in that act of scratching existence into stone, he broke the only law that mattered, that slaves should vanish without trace. As dawn returned, the garden would come alive again with ordered footsteps and clipped voices. The boy would stand by the fountain, oil gleaming on his skin, waiting for a nod, a gesture, a command. He was not free to look at the sky for too long. That, too, was a privilege. In the empire's heart, where marble gleamed and fountains sang, beauty was the most dangerous form of captivity, and every smile was a rehearsal for survival. They were never meant to be seen, only admired. In Rome, obedience was not only demanded, it was staged. Every corridor, every atrium, every curtained chamber became a stage where silence was the highest form of eloquence. Beyond the marble columns where power slept and dreamed, there existed a ritual older than affection and colder than loyalty, the art of submission. Each morning began like a performance. The concubine rose before the master, the air still heavy with the scent of last night's incense and the faint echo of laughter from distant rooms. A slave girl entered carrying a bronze mirror, her hands trembling. Another poured water scented with rose petals. The concubine stood still as attendants washed and combed his hair, powdered his skin, and bound his tunic with cords dyed imperial red. His reflection was a stranger's beautiful, yes, but not his own. He learned that stillness was safety. Every motion had meaning, every glance a consequence. In this theater of obedience, to move too freely was rebellion. To speak uninvited was folly. Marshall once wrote mockingly of the pretty ones who look down when praised, a cruel jest on those who had no choice but to perfect modesty. Even laughter had its measure, soft, brief, and never too loud. The villa itself conspired to maintain the illusion. Light filtered through patterned screens, never fully revealing the faces within. Curtains muffled sound, floors gleamed like mirrors. Every element reminded the enslaved that beauty was performance, not identity. The master's guests saw only grace and composure, never the pulse of fear beneath the skin. Sometimes the concubine would be summoned without warning. A servant whispered his name. He entered the chamber with his head bowed, eyes tracing the mosaic floor instead of the men who sat drinking. A senator might lift a hand, not to strike but to signal. Pour the wine, recite the verse, dance without music. The boy obeyed, and the room watched him as they would a rare sculpture admired for form, emptied of soul. Outside, Rome roared with life, the rumble of carts, the shouts of traders, the clang of blacksmiths. But inside these walls, the air was thick with silence. Obedience became language. The concubine knew how to listen for tone, how to read the sharp pause before command, how to anticipate desire before it was spoken. He existed in the pause between orders, where survival lived. Petronius, the decadent chronicler of Nero's court, once described such scenes a banquet where laughter covered cruelty. Guests wagered on how long a boy could hold a jug without trembling. When his arm finally shook, the crowd clapped as if watching sport. "He has learned grace under weight," a voice joked. No one laughed harder than the host. Behind these displays, a quieter struggle unfolded. Roman masculinity was defined by dominance. To command was strength, to yield was shame. Yet desire complicated everything. The master might crave the very softness he despised. He might whisper tenderness in the dark, only to deny it by daylight. Juvenal sneered at men who lose themselves in foreign perfume, mocking those whose pleasures betrayed their power. But beneath the satire lay a truth. In a society built on conquest, even affection became conquest. Still, resistance found small, almost invisible forms. When masters slept, concubines and kitchen slaves traded murmured stories of old gods, of rivers far away, of mothers who once sang them to sleep. One might trace secret symbols into the dust beneath a table leg. A bird, a wave, a name. Others left fragments of verse scratched into plaster, lines that no one was meant to read. A few freedmen, long escaped from such lives, etched warnings on the walls of taverns. Do not envy the adorned, the chain is only gilded. There was humor, too sly, subversive, whispered in the kitchens. One story told of a senator so obsessed with a young servant's beauty that he ordered his face covered with a veil during meals. The boy obeyed, but one evening he slipped beneath the table, replaced the senator's sandals with a mismatched pair, and said nothing. The laughter that followed was quiet, dangerous, and shared. In that small defiance lived something like freedom. Evening fell, and the villa transformed once more. Lamps flickered, casting trembling shadows across the frescoed walls. Perfume burned in shallow dishes, mingling with the smell of roasted figs. The concubine stood at a distance, waiting for dismissal. He had performed perfectly, neither too distant nor too eager, neither too silent nor too bold. The master gave a nod. The boy bowed and withdrew, his sandals whispering against the floor. In the corridor, the bronze mirrors caught his reflection in passing. He paused, watching himself through the dim light the face the empire adored, the face that could never belong to itself. Behind that reflection, another image seemed to shimmer, the ghost of who he once was, fading like incense smoke. Somewhere, beyond the marble walls, Rome celebrated another victory. Trumpets sounded over the hills, the crowd chanting names of generals and gods. But here, in the quiet heart of a house, another kind of theater continued, one of masks, obedience, and unspoken grief. Tomorrow, the curtain would rise again. The gestures rehearsed, the silence perfected. And once more, the concubine would stand before the masters of the world beautiful, voiceless, and unseen. His reflection in polished bronze blinked back, hollow and still. The face looked human, but it was no longer his. The dust of centuries clings to the air, soft as breath. Beneath Rome's marble foundations, whispers stir not of emperors or generals, but of the forgotten. The trowel of an archaeologist brushes against plaster, and suddenly, a name reappears after 2,000 years. Claudia Restituta. A slave once. A concubine, perhaps. Freed, maybe loved. The walls remember what history tried to silence. In a dim trench near the Esquiline Hill, the earth opens like a wound. Bones lie beneath mosaic fragments, the remnants of a private world, one that pulsed behind the grandeur of temples and triumphal arches. To the passer-by, Rome was marble and law. But beneath that glittering surface it was made of breath, flesh, and whispered promises between master and concubine. "Do you think she carved it herself?" a young archaeologist asks, tracing the faint letters. Her mentor shakes his head, half smiling. Maybe. Or maybe someone carved it for her. That's how memory survives, not through blood, but through someone who cared enough to write your name. That simple act, a name, etched into plaster, defies the empire's silence. Most concubines left no tombs, no epitaphs. Yet their traces remain in the margins. Graffiti beneath frescoes, dedications in humble catacombs, legal tablets recording emancipation. Rome's grandeur was built not only by conquest, but by the intimacy of lives intertwined across class, desire, and survival. In the 1st century, manumission offered a narrow path to freedom. A concubine could be freed by the man who kept her her body no longer property, her name restored. Yet freedom carried a shadow. The libertina, the freedwoman, remained marked by her past. Even the marble statues that idealized her beauty whispered her subservience through pose and gaze. She could wear pearls now, but her wrists still remembered the weight of absence. In the quiet of a suburban villa, we can imagine a scene. The year is 62 CE. A former slave named Livia Callista stands beside her patron's sarcophagus. The marble lid bears both their names, his carved larger, hers smaller but still visible. She touches the letters, her fingers trembling. "He promised me eternity," she might whisper. And yet, it's only his story they'll tell. The marble listens, unyielding, and keeps her secret longer than any witness could. The world of concubinage was Rome's silent institution, neither fully illicit nor honorable. It existed in the spaces law refused to sanctify but desire could not contain. A concubine could never be a matrona, but her influence seeped into every corner of Roman life, the art that adorned villas, the lullabies sung to children born between love and law, the whispered prayers offered at household shrines. Centuries later, artists captured echoes of that intimacy. A fresco from Pompeii shows Venus reclining on a couch, attended by a servant girl whose eyes mirror something deeper than duty. Scholars debate her identity: a muse, a lover, or a shadow self. But what if she was simply seen for once? The tenderness of her gaze remains more eternal than any emperor's decree. When Christianity rose from the catacombs, it inherited these contradictions. The Church denounced concubinage, yet absorbed its imagery: the bride of Christ, the sacred union, the devotion of the soul to its master. The moral boundary between purity and passion blurred, sculpted in marble and sermon alike. Perhaps that is how memory survives. Transfigured, disguised, but never erased. The archaeologists catalog each fragment carefully: pottery, bone, inscription. Yet some discoveries resist classification. A painted fragment reveals two intertwined figures, one in fine linen, the other bare-shouldered, both rendered with aching tenderness. The pigment fades where their hands meet, as if centuries of touch have worn it away. "They loved," the lead researcher murmurs, and that was enough to outlast the empire. Science, too, has begun to listen to the whispers. In laboratories far from Rome, geneticists map the ancestry of ancient remains, tracing unexpected threads: North African blood in patrician tombs, Levantine DNA in villas once thought purely Roman. History's silence fractures. The empire was never marble white. It was a mosaic of breath and sorrow, of union and erasure. What remains today is less a story than an echo. The walls of the Domus Aurea still bear faint inscriptions scratched by hands that once trembled with fear or longing. In the flicker of torchlight, you can almost see them: a woman kneeling in the shadow of a column, her words a prayer or rebellion. "I was here," she might have written. "I was loved." And so, centuries later, we hear her, not in textbooks, not in triumphal arches, but in the quiet hum of discovery, the sound of brush meeting bone, of dust yielding its dead. The camera pulls back. The ruins glow gold in the evening light, pigeons scattering above crumbling stone. The archaeologists pack their tools, leaving behind neat rows of labeled fragments. The marble gleams, cracked but luminous, as if remembering the warmth of living hands. The empire fell, the names faded, the frescoes crumbled. But their breath, those soft, unrecorded lives, lingers still, in dust, in blood, in the quiet spaces history forgot.